The hardest moment of my life was not losing $5 million. It was watching the person who once knew me best look at me and believe I was worth nothing. I still remember the quiet sound of the envelope landing on the table. It was a simple moment, but it carried years of memories, misunderstandings, and emotions that neither of us had ever truly faced. My name is Nathan Caldwell, and for most of my life, I believed that people would eventually see the truth if you simply lived with honesty. I believed actions spoke louder than words. I believed I did not need to explain myself. But that day, I learned something important. Sometimes silence allows people to create their own version of your story, and sometimes that version is completely wrong. Rebecca Morgan and I were married for 27 years. When we first met, she was one of the most determined people I had ever known. She had dreams, ambition, and a drive that inspired everyone around her. I admired that about her. She was the person who encouraged me when I was still building my career and trying to understand where life would take me. We started with very little, but we were happy. We built our home one decision at a time. We celebrated small victories. We supported each other through difficult seasons. At least, that was how I remembered it. But over the years, something changed. Rebecca became more focused on reaching the next level in her career, and I became more focused on creating stability and protecting the life we had built. Neither of us realized that we were slowly moving in different directions. We were still living under the same roof, but we were beginning to see the world differently. After our divorce, Rebecca built an impressive career in the financial industry. She became respected, successful, and surrounded by people who understood her ambitions. I was happy for her, even though our relationship had changed. I never wanted to compete with her. I never wanted to prove that I had done better after we separated. I simply continued living the same way I always had. Quietly, carefully, without needing attention. What Rebecca did not know was that my life had changed in ways I never told her about. Years before our divorce, I had started investing in companies that I believed had potential. I made careful decisions, learned from mistakes, and slowly built something valuable. Eventually, I became financially successful, but I never changed the way I lived. I still drove a reliable car. I still preferred simple clothes. I still enjoyed ordinary mornings with a cup of coffee and a quiet house. To some people, that might have looked like a lack of success. To me, it was freedom. I never wanted money to become the first thing people noticed about me. I wanted my character to matter more than my bank account. That was why Rebecca never knew the truth. When we met again after our divorce, I knew she had a different image of me in her mind. She saw a man who had stayed the same while her own life moved forward. She saw someone who did not talk about achievements or status. She believed I had not changed because I had not grown. But she did not know the years of work behind the quiet life I chose. She did not know the decisions, the risks, and the patience that built everything I had. I was not meeting her that day to show off. I was not there to make her regret anything. I was there because despite everything that happened between us, I still cared about helping someone who had been an important part of my life. I placed the envelope on the table and looked at her. "Rebecca, I want you to have this," I said. She looked at me with confusion. "What is it?" she asked. "Something I believe can help." She opened the envelope and saw the check inside. For a moment, she said nothing. Then her expression changed. Not into gratitude, into disbelief. "Nathan, what is this supposed to mean?" she asked. I knew immediately that she had misunderstood. Before I could explain, she looked at the check again and shook her head. She thought I was trying to make a statement. She thought I was trying to remind her of what she had lost. "I do not need this from you," she said. The next few seconds changed everything. She picked up the check and tore it apart. I watched quietly as the pieces fell onto the table between us. But what hurt was not the check. It was realizing that after 27 years together, Rebecca still did not understand why I was there. She believed I was trying to prove my worth. She did not know I had never needed to prove it. Before I could say anything, the office door opened. A man stepped inside and immediately stopped when he saw me. His expression changed from surprise to recognition. He looked at Rebecca, then back at me. "Nathan," he said with respect, "I did not realize you were here." Rebecca looked confused. Then he smiled and added the words that changed the entire room. "Sir, it is an honor to see you again." In that moment, I knew everything Rebecca believed about me was about to change. The moment Charles Bennett walked into that office, I knew there was no way to keep the truth hidden anymore. For years, I had lived quietly by choice. I never needed recognition from strangers, and I never wanted my success to become the center of every conversation. But as Rebecca looked between Charles and me, I could see that the image she had created of me was beginning to change. Charles had known me for many years, not because of my lifestyle or the way I presented myself, but because he had seen the work behind everything I built. He knew the decisions I made, the risks I took, and the values that guided me. Rebecca only knew what she could see from the outside. And from the outside, I looked like someone who had stayed behind while she moved forward. After Charles greeted me, he noticed the pieces of the torn check on the table. He looked at Rebecca with a confused expression. "Is everything okay?" he asked. Rebecca did not answer immediately. She looked uncomfortable, almost as if she suddenly realized she had reacted to something she did not fully understand. "Nathan was offering me something," she finally said. Charles looked at me, then back at her. "I see." But I knew Charles understood more than those simple words suggested. He understood the meaning behind the situation. He knew I was not the kind of person who used money to make a point. After Charles stepped away to take care of another matter, Rebecca and I were left alone again. The silence between us felt different this time. Before, it was filled with frustration and assumptions. Now it was filled with questions. "Who are you, Nathan?" she finally asked. I looked at her because I knew she was not asking about my career or my finances. She was asking why she had never known this side of me. "I am the same person I have always been," I said. "That is the part one do not understand," she replied. "How could I have been married to you for 27 years and not know this?" I thought about that question for a long time. The truth was, I did not have one simple answer. Maybe I never gave her enough opportunities to see the full picture. Maybe I believed keeping things private was the same as protecting our relationship. Maybe I thought my actions would speak for themselves. But sometimes actions are not enough. Sometimes people need words. They need conversations. They need to feel included in the parts of life that matter. After our divorce, I had assumed Rebecca would not care about what I had accomplished. I thought there was no reason to explain because our marriage was over. But sitting there in that office, I realized something. Even after people leave our lives, the years we shared with them still matter. The memories, the struggles, and the dreams we built together do not disappear simply because the relationship changes. Rebecca looked down at the torn pieces of the check. "I thought you were trying to make me feel like I made the wrong decision," she said quietly. I shook my head. "That was never my intention." "Then why did you do it?" she asked. I answered honestly. "Because I knew you were facing a difficult situation, and I wanted to help. That is all." She looked surprised. "You were not trying to prove anything?" "No." I paused for a moment. "I stopped trying to prove myself a long time ago." Those words seemed to affect her more than I expected, because maybe that was the biggest difference between us. Rebecca had spent years trying to achieve more, because she believed success needed to be visible. I had spent years building quietly because I believed success needed to have meaning. Neither of us was wrong. We simply had different definitions of what mattered. Before leaving the office, Rebecca stopped me near the door. "Nathan, I need to ask you something." I turned around. "What?" She looked at me carefully. "Why did you never tell me?" I knew exactly what she meant. Why had I never told her about my success? Why had I allowed her to believe I was struggling? I took a moment before answering. "Because I never wanted you to look at me differently because of what I had. I wanted people to value me because of who I was." She remained quiet. For the first time, I felt like she was not defending herself. She was listening. But I also knew this conversation had only opened the door. The truth about my success was only one part of the story. The bigger question was how two people who once knew each other so well had become strangers. And that was the question we would have to face next. After that conversation with Rebecca, I spent a long time thinking about the years we had shared. It was strange how one moment could change the way you looked at an entire chapter of your life. For years, I believed our divorce happened because we wanted different things. I thought Rebecca wanted a life built around achievement, recognition, and constant progress, while I wanted a quieter life focused on stability and peace. But after seeing the way she looked at me in that office, I began to wonder if the real problem was not that we wanted different things. Maybe the real problem was that we stopped understanding each other. When Rebecca and I first met, neither of us cared about titles or success. We were two people trying to build something together. We rented a small apartment, planned our future carefully, and celebrated every small achievement. I still remember the early years when we would sit at the kitchen table late at night, talking about our dreams. Rebecca wanted to become someone who could make a difference in the business world. I wanted to create something meaningful that would provide security for the people I cared about. Back then, our dreams seemed connected. We were both working toward a better future. Somewhere along the way, though, we stopped sharing the journey. Rebecca became focused on reaching the next level in her career. She attended more meetings, traveled more often, and spent more time surrounded by people who understood her professional goals. I was doing something different. I was building my investments quietly and making decisions that required patience. My success did not happen overnight. There were years when I questioned my choices. There were moments when I made mistakes and had to start again. But I never talked about those struggles because I thought carrying them alone was part of being responsible. Looking back, I realized that was one of my biggest mistakes. I thought protecting Rebecca from stress was an act of love. I thought if I handled problems myself, I was making life easier for both of us. But relationships are not built on one person carrying everything. They are built when two people allow each other to be part of the journey. Rebecca and I had slowly created separate worlds while believing we were still building the same life. After our divorce, I heard people say that money changes people, but I never believed that. I think money simply reveals what is already there. For some people, it creates a need to show the world what they have. For others, it creates the freedom to live according to their values. For me, it gave me the ability to choose a simple life without worrying about appearances. That was something Rebecca never understood. She saw my quiet lifestyle and assumed I had stopped growing. She saw my lack of interest in luxury and assumed I lacked ambition. But she never saw the hours behind closed doors, the careful decisions, or the responsibility that came with building something successful. The truth was, I never wanted to become a different person just because my circumstances changed. I still enjoyed the same things. I still valued the same principles. I still believed that character mattered more than reputation. A few days after our meeting, Rebecca called me. I almost did not answer because I did not know what to expect. But something told me I should pick up. "Nathan," she said softly, "I have been thinking about what you said." I stayed quiet and listened. "I think I misunderstood you for a long time." Hearing those words from Rebecca was something I never expected. Not because I wanted her to admit she was wrong, but because I knew how difficult it was for anyone to question their own beliefs. "I thought you were hiding because you had something to be embarrassed about," she continued. "I never considered that maybe you were hiding because you did not want your success to change the way people treated you." I looked out the window as she spoke. Because for the first time in years, it felt like Rebecca was seeing the person behind the assumptions. But I also knew understanding does not happen all at once. One conversation cannot erase years of distance. There were still many things we needed to talk about. There were still memories we needed to revisit. And there was still one question that remained unanswered. How did two people who once knew each other so deeply become strangers? After Rebecca's phone call, I realized something had changed between us. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no sudden apology that fixed everything. There was simply a difference in the way she spoke to me. For the first time in years, she was not trying to defend her decisions or explain why she believed she was right. She was trying to understand. And that small change meant more to me than she probably realized. A few days later, Rebecca asked if we could meet for coffee. It was not a business meeting. It was not about money. It was just two people who had once shared a life trying to have an honest conversation. When I arrived, I noticed something different about her. She seemed quieter, almost thoughtful. She looked at me and smiled slightly. "I have been thinking about our marriage," she said. I nodded. "So have I." She looked down at her coffee cup for a moment before continuing. "I always thought our biggest problem was that we wanted different futures. But now I think that was only part of it." I listened carefully. "I think we stopped letting each other into our lives," she said. Her words stayed with me because they were exactly what I had been thinking. We had not stopped caring about each other. We had stopped sharing ourselves with each other. Rebecca told me about the years after our divorce. She admitted that she often compared her life to mine without actually knowing the truth about my life. She saw my simple choices and assumed I had given up. She saw my calm attitude and believed I was no longer ambitious. "I thought I was moving forward while you were standing still," she said. But I was wrong. I appreciated her honesty, but I also wanted her to understand something important. "Rebecca, you were not wrong for wanting success," I told her. "You worked hard for everything you achieved. The problem was never your ambition." She looked at me. "Then what was the problem?" I thought about the answer carefully. The problem was that we both started measuring each other by our own standards. You believed success had to be visible. I believed success could be private. We were both looking at each other through our own expectations instead of trying to understand the other person. She became quiet after that. I could tell she was thinking about all the moments when we had misunderstood each other. The truth was, our marriage did not fall apart because of one major mistake. It happened slowly. Small misunderstandings became habits. Unspoken feelings became distance. And eventually, we stopped recognizing the people we had become. Rebecca then asked me something I did not expect. When did you decide not to tell me about everything you built? I took a breath before answering. I never made one specific decision. It just happened over time. I explained that after our relationship started becoming more difficult, I did not know how to share that part of my life anymore. Every conversation felt like it could become an argument. I did not want my success to become another thing between us. I wanted it to be separate from our relationship. But I realized that keeping something private and keeping someone distant are not always the same thing. Sometimes, silence can create a wall even when the intention behind it is kindness. Rebecca nodded slowly. I think I did the same thing in my own way, she said. I became so focused on proving myself that I stopped noticing what was happening around me. 4. The first time, we were not talking about who was right or who was wrong. We were talking about what we both could have done differently. That conversation lasted almost 2 hours. We talked about memories we had avoided for years. We laughed about old moments. We admitted things that were difficult to say. And when we finally left the coffee shop, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Peace. I still did not know what the future would look like for Rebecca and me. But I knew one thing had changed. She was no longer looking at the version of me she had created in her mind. She was finally seeing the person standing in front of her. And sometimes, being truly seen is the first step toward healing what was once broken. After the conversation Rebecca and I had at the coffee shop, I expected things to return to normal. I thought we would simply continue our separate lives with a better understanding of each other. But something unexpected happened. We started talking more often. Not every day, and not in a way that felt forced. It was simply two people who had once shared 27 years of life, slowly learning how to communicate again. The strange thing was that talking to Rebecca now felt easier than it had in the final years of our marriage. There was less pressure, less need to prove a point. We were no longer trying to convince each other that our own perspective was the right one. We were finally listening. One afternoon, Rebecca asked if she could visit the office where I manage my investments. She told me she wanted to understand the world I had kept private for so long. At first, I hesitated. Not because I had anything to hide, but because I never wanted her to think I was inviting her there to impress her. I did not want the money or the success to become the focus of our conversation. Rebecca, I want you to understand something, I told her. The office is not what matters. The people, the decisions, and the work behind it are what matter. She nodded. I know. That is exactly why I want to see it. When she arrived, she looked around quietly. She expected something different. I could tell. Maybe she imagined a place filled with luxury and reminders of wealth. Instead, she found a simple workspace. There were no expensive decorations, no signs designed to impress visitors, just a team of people focused on their work. She met some of the employees who had been with me for years. She heard stories about difficult decisions, unexpected challenges, and the moments when things did not go according to plan. For the first time, she saw the journey instead of just the result. Later that day, we sat in my office and talked about the $5 million check. I understand now why I reacted the way I did, she said. I looked at her. What do you mean? I thought the check was about money, she explained. I thought you were showing me that you had succeeded without me. I thought you wanted me to feel something. I shook my head. I never wanted that. I know that now, she said. But back then, I was looking at everything through my own emotions. Her honesty meant more than she realized. Because that was the truth about many of our problems. We were not always responding to what the other person was actually doing. We were responding to what we believed their actions meant. We created stories in our minds and then reacted to those stories. Rebecca admitted that after our divorce, she had created a picture of me without ever asking if it was accurate. She assumed that because I lived simply, I had failed. She assumed that because I did not talk about my achievements, I had none. I think I confused being quiet with being unsuccessful, she said. I smiled slightly. And I confused being private with being understood. That was the moment when I realized both of us had been protecting ourselves in different ways. Rebecca protected herself by focusing on achievement. I protected myself by keeping things inside. Neither approach allowed us to truly connect. Before leaving, Rebecca stopped near the doorway and looked back at me. "Nathan, I want you to know something. I am sorry for seeing only one part of your story." I appreciated those words. Not because I needed an apology, but because they showed growth. The person standing in front of me was no longer the same person who had torn up that check. Without understanding its meaning, she was someone willing to look deeper. And I realized something important too. The goal was never to make Rebecca regret underestimating me. The goal was never to prove that I was the successful one and she was wrong. The real victory was something much quieter. It was knowing that after years of misunderstanding, two people could finally see each other clearly again. After Rebecca left my office that day, I found myself thinking about how different everything felt compared to just a few months earlier. The woman who once believed she knew my entire story was now asking questions because she genuinely wanted to understand. And I realized something important. Sometimes the biggest changes in relationships do not come from dramatic moments. They come from small moments when people finally become willing to listen. For years, Rebecca and I had both been waiting for the other person to understand us. The problem was that neither of us had taken enough time to understand the other first. We were both focused on being heard, but we forgot the importance of listening. A few weeks later, Rebecca and I met for dinner at a quiet restaurant near downtown Austin. It was not a special occasion. There was no announcement to make. It was simply another opportunity for two people with a shared history to have an honest conversation. During dinner, Rebecca asked me something I had not expected. "Nathan, do you ever regret not telling me about your success while we were still married?" I looked at her for a moment before answering. It was a difficult question because the honest answer was complicated. "Sometimes," I said, "but not because I wanted you to know about the money. I regret that I did not know how to share that part of my life with you." Rebecca looked thoughtful. "Why did you feel like you could not?" she asked. I thought back to the final years of our marriage. Because somewhere along the way, I felt like we were no longer having conversations. We were having debates. Every topic became about who was right. I started keeping things to myself because I did not want another argument. She nodded slowly. "I felt the same way," she admitted. "I stopped telling you things because I felt like you did not understand my world anymore." That was the moment when I realized how similar we actually were. We both felt alone. We both felt misunderstood. And instead of moving closer, we both created more distance. Rebecca told me about the pressure she felt in her career. She explained that every promotion brought new expectations. Every achievement created another goal. She had spent years trying to prove that she was capable, not only to other people, but also to herself. "I think I became so focused on proving I could succeed that I forgot to notice what I already had," she said. I understood that feeling more than she knew. Even though our paths looked different, we had both been searching for validation in our own ways. She searched for it through achievement. I searched for it through independence. Neither of us realized that we were both trying to feel valued. The conversation eventually moved back to the day she tore up the check. This time, there was no anger in her voice, only reflection. "When I saw that check, I did not see your kindness," she said. "I saw my own insecurity. I thought you were showing me something I did not have anymore." Her honesty surprised me. "Rebecca, I never wanted you to feel that way." "I know that now," she replied. "But at that moment, I was not seeing you clearly. I was seeing my own fears." Those words stayed with me because they explained so much about what had happened between us. People often believe they are reacting to another person's actions, but sometimes they are reacting to their own emotions. We do not always see people as they are. Sometimes we see them through the lens of our own experiences, fears, and assumptions. Before we left the restaurant, Rebecca smiled and said something that I never expected to hear from her. "I spent years thinking you were the person who did not change. But now I realize I was the one who stopped looking closely." I appreciated that moment, not because she admitted she was wrong, but because she was willing to be honest with herself. That required courage. As I drove home that evening, I thought about how much had changed. The check that once represented misunderstanding had become the reason we finally started talking again. The moment that seemed like rejection had opened the door to understanding. And I knew our story was no longer about proving who was right. It was about two people learning that respect begins when we stop assuming and start seeing each other for who we truly are. After everything Rebecca and I had talked about, I started noticing something I had not expected. The past no longer felt like a place filled only with disappointment. For years, I looked back at our marriage and focused on the moments when we failed each other. I remembered the conversations we avoided, the distance that grew between us, and the assumptions we made. But now I was beginning to see another side of the story. I was remembering the friendship we once had before we became two people trying to prove our own points. One afternoon, Rebecca called me and asked if I would help her with something. She was preparing for an important presentation at her company and wanted my opinion on a few ideas. At first, I was surprised. Years ago, she would have never asked me for advice in that area. She believed her professional world was something I did not understand. But this time, she was not asking because she needed approval. She was asking because she trusted my perspective. When we met, I listened as she explained her plans. I noticed something that had always been there, but that I had not paid enough attention to. Rebecca was still the same determined person I had fallen in love with decades earlier. Her ambition was not the problem. Her desire to succeed was not the problem. The problem was that somewhere along the way, we both allowed our strengths to become barriers between us. You know what I realized? Rebecca said after we finished talking. I spent years thinking you did not understand my goals. But maybe I never really tried to understand yours either. I smiled because that statement represented so much growth. I think we both did that, I replied. We thought our differences meant we were moving apart. But maybe we just needed to learn how to appreciate them. That conversation reminded me of something important. A relationship is not built because two people are identical. It is built because two people respect each other even when they see things differently. Rebecca and I had spent years comparing our choices instead of appreciating them. She valued achievement and progress. I valued patience and stability. We thought those differences made us incompatible. Now we understood they were simply different ways of approaching life. Later that month, Rebecca invited me to attend a small company event. She told me Charles would be there and that she wanted me to meet some of the people she worked with. When I arrived, I noticed the way people interacted with her. They respected her leadership and admired her dedication. Seeing that made me happy because I knew how hard she had worked. I never wanted my success to make her seem smaller. That was something I wanted her to understand. During the evening, Charles came over and spoke with us. He smiled and said, "Rebecca, I hope you know how fortunate your company is to have someone with your determination." She thanked him, then looked at me. "Nathan taught me something important," she said. I was surprised by her words. Charles looked curious. Rebecca continued, "I used to think success was about reaching a certain place. But I learned that success also depends on the people you become along the way." Hearing that meant more than she probably realized. Because those words were not about money, status, or achievements. They were about understanding. After the event, Rebecca and I walked outside together. The evening air was calm, and for a moment, everything felt surprisingly familiar. Not like we were trying to return to the past, but like we had finally made peace with it. "I want you to know something," Rebecca said. "When I think about that day in the office, I do not feel proud of how I reacted." I listened quietly. I thought I was protecting myself. But really, I was protecting an assumption I had created about you. I appreciated her honesty. "We both made mistakes," I said. "The important thing is that we learned from them." She nodded. That night, I realized something I had never considered before. Sometimes people do not need to be reminded of your value. Sometimes they need the chance to discover it for themselves. And sometimes the most meaningful changes happen when you stop trying to prove who you are and simply allow people the opportunity to finally see you. In the months after Rebecca and I started speaking again, I noticed something that surprised me. I was no longer thinking about what I had lost. For a long time after our divorce, I believed the end of our marriage was a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I focused on the years when we stopped communicating, the moments when we misunderstood each other, and the distance that slowly grew between us. But now, I was beginning to understand that the end of one chapter does not always mean the end of everything meaningful. Sometimes it creates the space people need to finally see the truth. Rebecca and I were not trying to recreate the marriage we once had. We were not pretending that the difficult years never happened. Instead, we were learning how to appreciate the history we shared while accepting that both of us had changed. That was something I never expected. I thought respect would return only after someone admitted they were wrong. But I discovered that real respect comes when people are willing to understand each other's experiences. One morning, Rebecca called me with an unexpected question. "Nathan, would you be willing to come with me to a charity event this weekend?" she asked. I paused for a moment because I did not expect that request. "Are you sure?" I asked. She laughed softly. "Yes, I am sure." She explained that the event was important to her company and that she wanted me there because she valued my perspective, not because of my success, not because of what I could provide, simply because she respected me. That difference meant more than she knew. When we arrived at the event, I noticed something that made me proud of Rebecca. She was surrounded by people who admired her dedication and leadership. She had built a career she worked hard for, and I realized I had never truly given her enough credit for that. During our marriage, I sometimes viewed her ambition as something that competed with our relationship. But now I saw it differently. Her ambition was part of who she was. It was one of the qualities that made me admire her when we first met. The problem was never that she wanted more. The problem was that we stopped making room for each other while chasing our own goals. Later that evening, Rebecca introduced me to several people from her company. Some knew who I was, and others only knew me as someone important in Rebecca's life. That was exactly how I wanted it to be. I did not need people to know about my achievements. I did not need recognition. I simply wanted to be respected for who I was. At one point, Charles approached us. He smiled and said, "Nathan, I am glad you came tonight." Rebecca looked at him, then at me. "Charles, I think I spent years misunderstanding him," she said. Charles nodded. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we understand the least because we assume we already know everything about them." Those words stayed with me, because that was exactly what happened between Rebecca and me. We thought we knew each other so well that we stopped asking questions. We stopped being curious. We stopped discovering who we were becoming. After the event, Rebecca and I sat outside for a few minutes before leaving. She looked at me and said, "I used to think losing you meant losing a part of my past. But now I realize I was also losing the chance to understand you." I did not know how to respond because those words carried so much honesty. "I think we both lost something," I said. "But maybe we also learned something." She smiled. "Maybe we did." Driving home that night, I thought about the check that started everything. A few months earlier, I believed that moment represented rejection. I believed it showed me that Rebecca no longer valued me. But I was wrong. It represented something else entirely. It was the moment when two people finally had to confront the assumptions they had carried for years. It was the moment when the truth had a chance to come forward. And I realized that sometimes the greatest changes do not happen when people finally see what you have achieved. They happen when people finally see who you have always been. Looking back now, I realized the moment that changed everything was never really about the check, the money, or even the misunderstanding between Rebecca and me. Those things were only the surface. The real story was about two people who spent years believing they understood each other while slowly forgetting to truly listen. For a long time, I thought the hardest part of losing my marriage was losing the person I loved. But eventually, I realized the hardest part was losing the ability to see each other clearly. Rebecca and I had both created versions of each other in our minds. She believed I had stopped growing because I lived quietly and avoided attention. I believed she cared more about achievement than connection because of how focused she became on her career. We were both looking at incomplete pictures and treating them as the whole truth. The irony was that we had spent 27 years together, yet we still found ways to misunderstand each other. But the good thing about time is that it gives people the opportunity to learn. It gives them the chance to look back with more wisdom than they had before. Over the months that followed, Rebecca and I continued to build a different kind of relationship. It was not the same as before. We were not trying to pretend that nothing had happened. We were not trying to erase the difficult memories. Instead, we were creating something new based on honesty and respect. One evening, Rebecca and I sat outside a small cafe near my neighborhood. The conversation was simple, but I knew it was important. She looked at me and said, "Nathan, I want you to know that I finally understand something." I waited for her to continue. "The person I underestimated was never someone who needed to prove anything. You were someone who already knew your value." I smiled because those words showed how much had changed. Years earlier, I would have wanted to hear that because I wanted to feel recognized. But now, I understood something different. My value was never determined by whether someone else noticed it. My value existed whether people saw it or not. That was one of the greatest lessons I learned through everything that happened. We often spend too much time trying to convince others of who we are. We explain ourselves. We defend our choices. We search for approval. But sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remain true to ourselves and allow time to reveal the truth. Rebecca also changed in ways that I respected. She became more open about her feelings. She started asking questions instead of making assumptions. She learned that success was not only about reaching goals, but also about maintaining meaningful relationships along the way. I admired that because growth requires honesty. It requires someone to admit that they do not have every answer. Before we said goodbye that evening, Rebecca looked at me and said, "I am sorry that I spent so many years seeing only one side of you." I nodded. "I am sorry that I did not do a better job of showing you the other side." That was the truth. Neither of us was completely right. Neither of us was completely wrong. We were simply two people who lost our way and eventually found a better understanding of each other. Today, when I think about the day she tore up that check, I no longer remember it as a moment of rejection. I remember it as the moment when everything hidden finally came into the open. It forced us to confront the assumptions we carried and the things we were afraid to say. It showed us that respect is not built by money, achievements, or appearances. It is built by understanding. The greatest lesson I learned was simple. People may not always recognize your worth immediately. They may judge you based on what they see instead of who you truly are. But you do not have to become someone else to prove your value. The right people will eventually see the truth. And sometimes, the most meaningful victories are not about showing someone what they lost. They are about becoming someone you are proud to be, even when nobody is watching.